Hello, my name is Susie Foottit and I'm a Director and Wealth Manager at Helm Godfrey. In goodness knows how many months later, still working from home. And I am being interviewed today by Ben.
Hi Susie, I wanted to ask you, do you have any actual real life cases where you feel you've really added value that people would be interested to hear and you'd be interested in sharing?
Yeah, I've got quite a few actually, and obviously I've been thinking about them. I think the first one that sticks in the mind is the benefits of actually knowing what investments you've actually got, what pensions you've actually got. So we had a situation where we were referred to a client by an existing client, and this chap was in hospital. He was suffering from a very serious type of cancer, and to be frank, it wasn't expected that he'd survive. But this lovely friend of his said that she was sure, because she'd worked with him, that he had some arrangements in the past, but he knew nothing about them. She'd discussed it with him in the past. So basically I sent over one of our advisors to see him, who had to go to the hospital, had to get all gowned up with masks and PPE before it was even invented, I think, and got some letters of authority signed. This advisor came back to the office and we went through everything. And having worked in the city for so many years, I probably know an awful lot about all of the pension arrangements that are in existence and were in existence. So we literally just sat down and wrote to all of the possible contenders who might have had pensions in the past. We knew that there was about one small pension that was worth about £30,000. And we wanted to make sure that all of the nominations in case of death were completely filled in and everything was correct. So if the worst happened and he did pass away, that his children would be able to benefit from this under the new rules that have come in, when children who are over 23 can actually benefit, as well as those that are just financially dependent on you. Anyway, so we started writing off these letters, and it was actually the most unbelievable situation. It was like a waterfall of letters coming back from all of these places where this chap had worked. And as from going from a pension fund of 30,000, in the end we found out that he had, I think it was £600,000 worth of pension benefits spread around the city out of all of the places that he'd worked for. So this was absolutely amazing, and one of them was an old style pension that had a guaranteed annuity, so it paid out something like 8 or 9% a year, which obviously in today's low interest rate world was a huge benefit. So the even better news was that this guy actually made a full recovery, and he's now in receipt of a pension of £30,000 a year, which covers his basic outgoings, plus he has 500,000 odd still remaining in the pension fund, which he dips in and out of as and when he wants to do things. So it was actually the most wonderful situation. It was very, very obviously great for him because it was life-changing, and it was so satisfying for us. But I actually doubt whether many advisors would have gone through everything that we did. It was only because I'm so long in the tooth that I was able to sort of have a good memory of all of the pension schemes that were around back in the 80s and 90s that he could potentially have been a member of.
That's fantastic. So well, I guess the moral of the story is to always, know what you've got and look after your paperwork.
Yeah, it's probably quite a good idea, so you don't end up in situations like that.
Fantastic. And is there any other stories?
Yeah, there's another one.
Yeah.
There's a type of insurance called income protection, and basically that pays out if you're unable to, depending on the terms of the policy, that should pay out if you're unable to follow your own occupation. So this is a case where I was having my highlights done at the hairdressers, and it's a very long process, and I was extremely bored. So I got chatting to the colourist chap there about his job and what else he did and all the rest of it. Basically I think we just got to the end of the colour, and he said, you know what, I think I should take out some insurance. So we actually set up some income protection, and which meant that it would pay him out a regular income for until retirement age, so long as he was unable to follow his own occupation, and that own occupation part is really important. So did it, forgot about it for a while, went back to get my highlights done. I don't know, it must have been a couple of years later. I mean, I do have them done more regularly than that, but he was obviously around all that time, and he was no longer there. So I got in contact with him and said, oh, you know, you've stopped working now at the hairdressers. He said, yes, I've become allergic to the chemicals, and every time I use the chemicals, I get a terrible rash and all the rest of it. And I said, well, can't you do any other hairdressing? He says, no. You know, I'm only a colourist, so that's my only qualification, so I can't do anything. And my little brain started working, and I thought, well, you know, if I recall, we actually arranged an income protection policy for you. Anyway, so cut a long story short, we put a claim in on the insurance for this, and it paid out. And the reason why it paid out was he was unable to follow his own occupation. So this chap, who was only in his mid-20s, basically had the freedom to look at other options, other career paths that he could do. And the last thing I heard from him was he was sailing yachts across the Caribbean. He was a yacht delivery person, and was thoroughly enjoying his life. He kept the income that was still paying out because he was still unable to follow his own occupation. I think he used to have to go in for tests every 6 months or every year just to make sure he was still allergic, and he was still allergic. So it was a very, very good outcome. He could travel around the world delivering yachts and didn't have to worry about being paid for it because he had an income coming in. So that was a really interesting story as well, and one that I keep in my mind. But the important thing here is, you know, you do have to think about if you couldn't do your own job, and whether or not if this is something you should be insuring against. And I heartily think that it is important that you make sure that if you couldn't do your own job, you know, long term, due to sickness or accident or whatever, then you should insure for it.
And do you think, with the world being how it's been over the last 6 months, people are more open and aware and interested in taking out various types of protection policy?
Yes, very much so. You know, there's a lot more press about it because you can just, you know, you can be lucky, and, you know, through this COVID crisis, there have been benefits in place for many people, but for the self-employed, it's not good. It never has been good, and it probably won't ever be good, because it's very difficult to work out the amount of cover that people should have, because by the nature of their business, the earnings fluctuate. So for self-employed particularly, I think it's one of the first things that you should be looking at, is making sure that you've got proper protection in case, so that if you can't work, that you have some benefits, and also for life cover and critical illness.
Yes, it's really, really important that those things are all covered.
Speak to your, you know, it's very exciting to talk about investments, and everybody would like 10% return a year with no downside. But actually, the most important place to start in any financial planning exercise is through making sure that the protection's in place first. And it hasn't got to be expensive. I mean, you can do bog standard family income benefit, excuse me, which will give you a basic level of income, just so that if you are dealing with a family emergency, it doesn't mean to say, you know, you're dead. I mean, you just might not be able to work because you're having lots of treatment. And it's good to have some protection that you are actually in control of yourself, that you know will pay out. Goodness knows what would have happened without the furlough scheme that's come in recently, and the extra benefits. But as I'm sure most people know, it's not easy always to qualify for it. So I would say it's wonderful to have those sorts of benefits, but you know, if you have responsibility to your family and to yourself to make sure that if something unexpected happens, that you've got cover that you can count on. Look, we all insure our cars, and we all insure our houses.
Thanks, Susie. That's really, really interesting. And were there any other sort of anecdotes or tales that would be of interest to people to hear?
Well, I think this was very much of interest to a particular client of mine. The final one I'll talk about is a chap that I had arranged insurance for some while back, and pensions and various other investment arrangements, but had really not been in contact with for a few years because he'd moved to Australia. So he was working out there. Anyway, when he returned back to the UK, we got in contact with each other and had a meeting. And I said, so, you know, how have you, first question, how have you been? He says, well, I'm actually fine now. He said, but I had a heart attack 5 years ago when I was actually in Australia. I said, oh my goodness me, that's terrible. He was in his 50s, I think, when it happened. And I said, so did you actually, you know, I didn't know about that, but didn't you make a claim on your insurance that you've got? He then said, what insurance? So when he'd arranged his mortgage back in the day, I mean, many years before, 10 years before, I'd set up basically life cover with critical illness. And critical illness cover, as you may or not know, would pay out on the diagnosis of a specific critical illness. And one of the main ones is a heart attack or cancer, so long as it's a proper heart attack. And his was a proper heart attack. I'm not a doctor, but it was a proper heart attack. Anyway, so again, I mean, a wonderful outcome. We put in the claim to the insurance company. They were very suspicious and, you know, they were asking questions. Why hadn't he claimed? You know, and it was truly a matter that he didn't know that he'd had it or forgotten about it, because, you know, we did it in a rush. And as I said before, you know, one of the first things I try and arrange for people is to make sure that they've got proper protection. So he probably wasn't even that much focused on it, you know, when he was in his 20s. But it paid out. I think it was I think it was 330,000 that paid out, which basically he'd come back to Australia and was restarting his career, and it enabled him to pay off his mortgage and you know, have some money in the bank to make sure that he could carry on with his new work back in London. So that was a great story. I mean, obviously there's lots of cases where people have just had proper life insurance in place, and when they have passed away, then it's been a very good thing to have. And I think that a lot of people might think I spend too much time talking about protection, but when I first started in the business, you know, when I was in my 20s, I didn't have there were hardly any cases where you would have somebody who died, because I tended to deal with people who were roughly around my age. As I'm getting older, you know, there's a lot more claims coming in, and it's actually, although it's not a wonderful thing, of course, when somebody dies, it's very satisfying when you know that you've done the right job, you've got the policies in place, and you've set up the proper trusts around them so they pay out, so that they have at least no financial worries, the dependents.
Thanks, Susie. That's been a really, really fascinating insight.
Well, please get in touch with us at Helm Godfrey if you want further information on protection. As I say, it's a really positive thing to have in your portfolio, but quite important as well to actually let your dependents know, or write notes of actually what you've got.
Thank you.